Hello, welcome back to the Caribou Data Science channel. This is an unofficial afternoon live stream. It's loosely titled Bible Word Studies. Although tonight we're going to take a look at, or this afternoon we'll take a look at a couple. The brief. Uh, we're going to look at at a very brief history of how Hebrew was modern Hebrew was revived. Uh, so let's begin right there, because at some point during the history of the Jewish people, Hebrew stopped being used during everyday language. Now, it could have been that they simply adopted their first language was the language of the land in which they understood, in which they lived. We are told in the book of Acts that there were people in Jerusalem from all over the world from many different languages and countries. Okay, it's also generally believed that by the time of Yeshua, uh, the Greek Old Testament had replaced the Hebrew Old Testament. I'll just mention that in modern terms, that the Hebrew Old Testament is referred to as a Massoretic text, and the primary Greek text is the Septuagint. So let's just take a brief look first at the question of Hebrew itself. You can see here it says it was Eliezer ben Yehuda is credited with reviving modern Hebrew. He is a linguist and lexicographer. Lexicon simply means dictionary, so he wrote dictionaries. Who dedicated his life to revival of the Hebrew language. Born in Lithuania in 1858, Ben Yehuda immigrated to Palestine in 1881. Here's the point. At that time, Hebrew was primarily used for religious, okay, and scholarly purposes. Okay, so it was still being used, but just not as a day-to-day language. Okay, it was not spoken in everyday life. Ben Yehuda believed that the Jewish people, to establish national identity in their homeland, they needed to revive Hebrew as a modern spoken language. Ben Yehuda and his wife Deborah made a significant effort to speak Hebrew exclusively in their household and raised their son as the first native speaker of modern Hebrew. Ben Yehuda also founded the Hebrew language schools, published Hebrew newspapers, journals, and developed a comprehensive dictionary of Hebrew, which became an essential resource for the language revival. Though through his dedication and perseverance, Eliezer ben Yehuda played a crucial role in reviving modern Hebrew and making it the official language of the state of Israel upon its establishment in 1948. Now, I would say, while the official language, of Israel certainly is Hebrew, I would say its second language is English. Okay, if you go to Israel, or when you go to Israel, everybody, maybe except for some Arabs, certainly every Jew is going to speak good English. Okay, they speak good English, and you take American dollars instead as well as shekels. Okay, so anyway, let's come over next to the question of the history of the text. Okay, um, so the question is, what uh, version of the Bible, when Yeshua read from the scroll in the synagogue, what version was he reading? Okay, now it's very easy to say, well, the Septuagint, because the Septuagint is quoted in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, the New Covenant. But is that really true? I mean, I have read in one Christian commentary that by the time of Yeshua, the Greek Old Testament had replaced the Hebrew text. Okay, but I'm not sure it's actually true. It's possible, again, within the religious circles and the. Now, I can certainly see the Pharisees and the Sadducees only read in the Hebrew because they were scholars. Okay. Anyway, but out of this, let's ask one question here first of all. But there is a second Old Testament, and that is what's called the Septuagint. Okay, so the Greek Old Testament is commonly known as the LXX, or the 70. The term Septuagint comes from the Latin word Septuagint, meaning 70, which refers to the tradition that 70 or 72 Jewish scholars translated Hebrew scriptures into Greek using the Hellenistic during the Hellenistic period. Okay, the Septuagint is a significant ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible and is highly regarded by both Jews and Christians. But the question is, when was the Septuagint actually written? Let's go over here, the obsidian. Let's create a new okay. And the question is, when was the Septuagint? That's the first question is, when was the Septuagint written? Septuagint is a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Now it's important to realize that this would have been the ancient Greek called Koine Greek rather than the modern Greek, over a period of time rather than a specific point. The translation work began in the 3rd century BCE, before the Common Era, before the birth of Christ. Okay, and continued into the 2nd century of BCE. Okay, began the 3rd century into the 2nd century. Okay, so if this date is roughly correct, that would mean it would have been completed roughly maybe 200 years before the birth of Yeshua, before the Second Temple period. The exact dates and duration of translation process is not known with certainty, but the tradition attributes the translation to a group of Jewish scholars who were active during the reign of Ptolemy II, Philippus of Israel. According to the legendary account found in the letter of Astaris, the translation was completed in 72 days by 72 translators, giving it the name 70 translation, which means that 70 in Latin. However, the historical accuracy of this account is debated among scholars. Nonetheless, the Septuagint gradually gained an important acceptance and became an influential text in Jewish and Christian communities. Okay, let's come back up here now. Right. So the Greek, come back up here. This equals copy. So again, the Greek Old Testament is called the Septuagint. The Latin term comes from the Latin term. Scriptures in the Greek during the Hellenistic period. The Septuagint is considered ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew in Christian text. Now, is it considered to be equal? The status of the Septuagint in relation to the Hebrew Scriptures varies depending on the perspective. In the Jewish tradition, the Hebrew Scriptures are known as a Masoretic text and are considered the authoritative original text of the Tanakh. While the Septuagint is recognized as an important translation, but the Masoretic text is not a translation, right? It's the original language. And important, it is not given the same level of authority as the Hebrew Scriptures. In contrast, the Christian tradition, the Septuagint, holds a significant importance. It was the version of the Old Testament widely used in early Christian communities. That's because the early Christian Gentile communities would, of course, have spoken Greek or Latin, right? So of course they're going to use the Septuagint. That doesn't make it more important. Okay, at least in my opinion, holds a significant importance. It was a version of the Old Testament widely used in the early Christian communities, and is often uh, quoted in the New Testament. Many early Christian theologians and writers relied heavily on the Septuagint. Therefore, for Christians, the Septuagint has been historically regarded as an authoritative translation and holds a prominent place among New Testament. It's important to note that there are variations and difference between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text. Okay, 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 here's the big point here. They're not original translations. There are no original translations left. And I'm going to say, if we say there's no original the question, of course, is what? What language did God speak to? What language was the Ten Commandments written in? I mean, what was Hebrew spoken before the Hebrews Jews entered Egypt, or was it a more ancient language like Aramaic? No. Yeah, these copies are centuries after the original manuscript was written. Okay, and that's the oldest manuscripts only go back to 400 years after the birth of Christ. Okay. Okay, that's the important point. All right. Here's a question: If the oldest, if the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Isaiah scroll, for instance, is older than the Septuagint, shouldn't more weight be given, at least in that book, to the Dead Sea Scrolls? Now the question is, why is it that Christians, either knowingly or unknowingly, continue to give weight to Septuagint over the Greek? Okay. Well, honestly, I mean, you could argue, well, because that's apparently the book that was that's apparently the that's apparently uh, because it was written, because it was used by early Christian communities. Well, the reason they used it wasn't because it was more authoritative. It's because it was in the Greek and they knew Greek. Now, some scholars have suggested that, in actual fact, when Jesus stood in the synagogue and read from the scroll, he was reading from the Greek text. The argument is that by the time of Yeshua, you know, Aramaic replaced Hebrew in the everyday language, became the everyday language, the vulgar language, if you will, and Greek replaced the Hebrew text. Well, as we saw earlier, that's apparently not the case. The Hebrew always, for both religious purposes and study and scholarly work, the Hebrew language never went never disappeared. Okay. So what else we got back up here? Okay. Here's a good test for ChatGPT. Can it actually find Ah. So does this mean that all the quotations in the New Testament come from the Septuagint? Did, could a fisherman have read and spoken Greek, or a simple carpenter's son? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I would say, well, I would say there's a higher degree to the chances are higher that outside of Israel that may be true. And the people who lived in the Hellenistic world. So can you give me some examples? Okay. There are numerous examples. Now, length variation. The Septuagint often contains longer versions of certain books or passages compared to the Hebrew Bible. For example, the Septuagint version of Jeremiah is significantly longer than the Hebrew version, including additional verses and chapters. Now, order of books. The Septuagint follows a different order of books compared to the Hebrew Bible. For example, in the Septuagint, the book of Daniel is placed before the book of Esther. Textual variations. There are textual differences in specific verses or passages. For instance, Isaiah 7:14, the Hebrew text uses the word Alma, meaning a young woman, while the Septuagint uses the Greek word Parthenatos, meaning virgin. This difference has a theological implication in interpreting the prophecy of the birth of a child. Okay, this is a good one. This is a good one. All right. Uh, Now, the question is does young woman mean virgin in Hebrew? In Jewish culture, does young woman mean virgin? I mean, could it be within Jewish culture, even to this day, I would say, is there's two types of women. There's young unmarried women who are virgin both, or you certainly shouldn't be. But yeah, this one has caused some theologians, Christian theologians, say, "Oh, well, you see, it doesn't say virgin; it says young woman." No, the Hebrew means young. So, what is the Hebrew word for virgin? 7:14. wait a second. So up here, uh, it's saying that, for instance, the Hebrew word used, text uses the word amah, meaning young woman. But down here it says the word is used in various contexts throughout the Hebrew Bible, including passages such as 7:14, where it is associated with the prophecy of the birth of a child. Let's take a look at Isaiah 7:14. Okay. According to this here, it says this is virgin. I mean, a virgin, a young woman, a virgin. So which is it? This seems to say that it says virgin. Okay. You see the tangled mess when you get into, we start looking at ancient, we look at the biblical languages. uh, does that mean we should cite see this is important here also in it. Now, additional books. The Septuagint includes additional books found in the Bible. Oh, so we can cite the scripture from the uh-huh. Yes. Not right now. A little bit later on. Okay. Yeah, I'm doing some on the internet right now. What's that? Okay. Yeah. Oh, by the way, uh, the original King James version included these books. By the way, which is I think is why we have an American King James version. What? An American King James version? What does that mean? So so the Bible read by John Wesley and William Booth uh, included all these additional books. The Bible that first came to America would have also included these books, by the way. So we can cite certain words and verses in our modern translations, but we're going to ignore the fact that these books are also part of that same tradition. There are differences in words, choices, sentences, structures, and stylistic variation between the Septuagint and Hebrew Bible. These variations can lead to different nuances in interpretation in the sect. Let's just copy this little part right here as a conclusion. Okay. Let's enclose these in. Okay. Okay. And with that, I'm going to bring this this session to a close. All right. I hope you found it somewhat interesting. Hopefully, it maybe challenged you a little bit. to understand the role that the Greek Old Testament plays in even in modern Christianity. Okay, the one place where recently readers of it has to do with 2 Samuel, which includes the phrase, which is like, I think what, 17:1 or 15:1, and it says begins with in the number of years Absalom, and it has to do with the with when King David's son Absalom rebellion took place. Some Bible translations say 4 years, at the end of 4 years, and some say at the end of 40 years. Okay. Now the question is, if I've addressed it, go back and look. You can see my notes. I've addressed this question. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to do that. If you go back and look at the videos, you'll see I devoted an entire video almost to that single verse there. Okay. But again, Christians, I'll point out finally that the King James Version, the Old Testament King James Version, used the Massoretic text, okay, the Hebrew text. Modern translations use a combination depending on which one suits their purpose, either the Greek or the Hebrew. So anyway, thanks so much for your time today, folks. See you back over this evening at 9 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time.